I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
So I have Mary Karr on the line. She's one of my absolute favorite authors, and most importantly, she just came out with a new book, The Art of the Memoir. And this is, Mary, after you've written 3 excellent memoirs. You're like memoir crazy.
I know, right?
So
that's all they'll pay me for. If they would pay me to write something else, I'd write something else.
Well, okay, I'm going to ask you about that. So you've written Cherry, which is kind of a young adult, not I don't want to use the word young adult, but kind of like adolescence to adulthood memoir, Liars Club, and Lit. And I think that's kind of the chronological time of these memoirs, even though it wasn't the order in which you wrote them.
No, Liars Club was first.
Right, it wasn't the order in which you wrote them. Liars Club, I sort of feel, was like your seminal memoir.
Oh, good for me.
Well, but now you've written The Art of the Memoir, because, and I want to ask, I have a couple of questions about this, but I think it's important for the audience to know what a memoir is. It doesn't necessarily mean this is like the greatest work of literature ever. It might mean just, hey, I need to get honest with myself and share experiences I have on the written page, because there's value there, whether I recognize it immediately or not. And I'm just curious what's your take on the memoir form?
I don't know. It's just a form that I was very compelled by when I was a little kid. I think I was a lonely, bookish, weird kid, and growing up in the Southeast Texas backwater, and the people in books and on the page were kind of more real to me in many ways than a lot of the people I ran into. And something about reading other people's life stories just made me less lonely. So when I was 10 years old, I wrote in my little journal, when I grow up, I will write 1/2 poetry and 1/2 autobiography. So I don't know, just something about the form always compelled me. And I happened to meet a lot of kind of wonderful memoirists in graduate school, and eventually found my way to the form after I guess I've been teaching it. I started teaching it in 85, and my first book came out in 95. So I spent most of my life reading them.
Now, what's interesting is you mentioned poetry and memoir, and of course, a huge kind of area in the middle there is fiction. And, it seems to me a lot of times fiction has lost its luster a little bit because we're so exposed to reality, like through TV and through other forms and through other media, that maybe fiction is not as interesting anymore as memoir. For let's say 100 years, fiction was interesting, but now memoir and so-called creative narrative nonfiction has been replacing it.
I don't know if that's actually true or not. I know that I've been very bored by a lot of the sort of, dystopic, unreal, kind of, and also really hyper-intellectual fiction that really prides itself on its unreality. And, I read because I need help. I need to connect with another. I need to connect with other people. I grew up in a complicated household, and I just think I want to feel connected to other people. And if you're writing about your North Korean, prison experience when you're some rich white kid in the Midwest, I don't know. It just never blew up my cut. There's something. Those books are always maybe really good in the first chapter, and then they just kind of trail off and get less interesting to me.
So I want to push on this a little bit, because I think some fiction is basically memoir clothed in the sensibilities of the writer. So take for instance Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which is clearly a work of fiction and also at the same time clearly his memoir.
Well, a better example might be Philip Roth, writing about a character called Philip Roth, and essentially detailing a divorce and his divorce from Claire Bloom, and then slapping fiction on the book so she can't sue him. So, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. The most interesting parts of that book were, I just happen to know, were nonfiction. So.
Okay, so it could be the case that, I think this happens actually a lot with quality fiction. Like, I don't know if you've read Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son, for instance, which was
it's one of the great books of all time. Absolutely. Now that's a fabulous work of fiction to me, and it is fairly autobiographical from what I understand. I don't know if that's true or not. I know Dennis a little bit, but
let's assume
it's a great damn book.
Let's assume it's 100% autobiographical, just for argument, and yet he packaged it as fiction. I think, again, some of the best fiction out there, the fiction, as they say, is always kind of a lie told truthfully, or the truth told with a lie. I forget the order of that. But so it seems like even in some of these, like you mentioned, dystopian novels or other things, ultimately the quality of the writing is going to come from whether is this truth coming from the writer or not, or is this just made up?
Well, I think if you read George Saunders, who's my example, to me is an example of somebody who writes dystopic fiction that is incredibly emotionally and psychologically realistic. It's not really written to dazzle you with the weirdness of his imagination. It's written to explore the human heart. So I think those are great stories, and I think he's probably the best short story writer in English right now, in my personal opinion. So, I don't think there's anything about dystopic fiction that's bad. I think most fiction is bad the way most memoirs are bad, the way most poems are bad, the way most interviews are bad. I think it's hard to get at the core of stuff, right?
Yeah, so that's like in any artistic medium. Like most music is bad.
Yeah, exactly. Sure.
So one of the things, so you talk about the elements of what make a good memoir, and one word that you use over and over again to describe various memoirists is the word carnal. So, in terms of the physicality of what the author is going through, and that puts the reader in the scene with the writer so you can connect more. And I wonder if you can explain that word a little more.
I mean, people use the word physical or sensory, and often when people think of that, you think of the five senses, and you don't often think of the, kinesthetic, what it feels like to occupy a body, and what those, touch is in there, but it's mostly when you're teaching undergraduates, say, to write in sensory language, you think of touch as like feeling the edge of something, not being inside their bodies, looking out of their faces, having a feeling. And so, I mean, people think of carnal as sexual, and I don't mean it that way. I guess I'm Catholic. I guess it's just from incarnate, in meat, that we are sacks of meat, and somehow writing in a way that's physically so vivid that rather than telling the reader how to feel, actually making the reader feel that thing. And letting the reader draw opinions.
What if a lack of carnality is what actually is, the memoirist has experienced and wants to express?
Yeah, no, I think they'll write better not carnal. Most of the ones that I've read are, very good carnally. I mean, I would say, actually, G.H. Hardy's A Mathematician's Apology is one of the most disembodied memoirs. There's nothing carnal about it, and it's one of the great memoirs, certainly the great memoir by a mathematician I've ever read, or about being a mathematician. So I think I also stress that the writer has to exploit the nature of his or her talent.
So you bring up G.H. Hardy's A Mathematician's Apology as his memoir, and in there he sort of expresses how when his math skills started to go down, I guess as he got older, he wanted to kill himself. And I'm wondering, so you've written 3 memoirs over the past 25 years or 20 years. You started 25 years ago writing on A Liars Club. Do you ever get nervous?
Actually, I probably started, 35 years ago writing on Liars Club. Just took me a long time to get to it.
Right. So
yeah.
Do you ever get nervous? I mean, ultimately, a fiction writer can write fiction forever, but a memoirist only has so many stories. Now, of course, there are many ways to slice the same story, and there's many ways to overlap memoirs. But is the fate of a memoirist ultimately to watch their skills of memoiring go down?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I'm not going to kill myself if I don't write another memoir. I guess it kind of doesn't matter. I'm working on a book of poems right now. I've always considered myself. I've published 4 books of poems. I have a 5th that I'm trying to finish right now. So I always sort of considered myself a poet who wrote memoirs for money. So if I don't write another memoir, obviously I'll miss the damn money, but I'm not somebody who would kill myself if I couldn't write anymore. I would assume I would be maybe making myself more useful.
And by the way, not to suggest that you were to kill yourself, but you then wrote this book, The Art of the Memoir. So clearly you're finding a way to take the knowledge you've gained from writing these excellent memoirs to writing almost a how-to. This is almost a memoir of you reading other memoirs and teaching it. So you figured out a way to reinvent.
Well, it's actually I disagree respectfully. I mean, it's funny. People have sort of seen it that way, but I really saw it more as a way to, and obviously I don't know what it is. I just wrote it. I mean, I'm sort of none of my business what it is in the world or the marketplace, but I intended it to be also a book about how we all remember ourselves and our families and our loved ones, whether we ever write it down or not. I kind of wanted it to be about the nature of memory and the nature of an examined life, if you know what I'm saying. But it's not a memoir of my writing memoirs. I mean, if that were true, I would have started by writing about my first memoir, and sort of written it that way. But
although, by the way, you do describe in great detail, and I'm going to get to this in a second. You do describe in great detail kind of the troubles of starting that first memoir, and I thought that was very beautiful how you did it, and described step by step what was going on in your head while you were writing and at least beginning that first memoir.
Thank you, because it almost beat me to death, right? I think it takes me a long time to get to the truth, which people don't even believe exists anymore. But I think I usually start with very convenient ideas and convenient memories in which I always appear doing beautiful and noble things, and then it usually turns out that I was the one making a lot of the trouble.
Well, you kind of use that example when you describe not only for yourself but for Catherine Harrison, who wrote this a memoir about her adult sort of affair with her father, but how she started out initially, she wrote a novel, and you started out initially thinking you would write a novel, and it just didn't come across in both cases, you point out, as the truth. And so I'm wondering, does the truth come because you both were natural memoirists, like that was the way you were able to tease out the truth, or could you have found a way through fiction to tease out the truth?
I don't know about Catherine. She has gone on to write some excellent novels, so very few people are good in both forms, and I think she probably is good in both forms. For me, for my part, I could not have written it in fiction. I could not have sort of, a great fiction writer. Toni Morrison, to me, writes a greater truth in fiction than she would in memoir. Hilary Mantel wrote a beautiful memoir called Giving Up the Ghost that I taught. I'm about to teach. But if you read her novels, Beyond Black or Wolf Hall or Bringing Up the Body, those are in many ways, more substantial books. Her memoir is beautiful and terse, and certainly worth reading and rereading. But in some ways, I like her fiction better.
So it brings up two things. The first is what is truth to you then? Like, because it seems like obviously there's layers of truth. There's truth that's sort of exaggerated and a mash of characters, and you're getting a point across, but you're not saying the exact facts. And then there's kind of the truth of just the facts, and then there's the truth of what's in your heart that really kind of destroyed you, and now you're getting it out there in some way that connects with the reader. So
I think all of us know what the truth is.
I don't know if that's true.
I think it's very fashionable for people to say they aren't, but if you in this interview, if you open the interview by saying, and then Mary Karr gave me a blowjob before our interview, that's a made up thing. That's untrue.
Only because we're talking on the phone right now, so it'd be hard.
But you know what I'm saying. I mean, if you're making up things that didn't happen, that's lying. And it's not hard. It's not hard to see that. And yes, I think for me, the main thing, I think, is describing the shape of your own mind and your own spirit and your own heart. And invariably the things that you're obsessed with, the thing that happened to you that was very dramatic, that maybe nobody else would find very dramatic. Maybe it was, the guy you had a crush on, looked at you funny at the dance and you ran into the bathroom and threw up and nothing happened, on the surface. And yet that was a big and dramatic moment for you. And if you're telling the story of your life, that event, however banal it might seem on the surface, has to be in there because it's at the core of who you are.
Okay, so
you know what I'm saying. So I
yes.
think you have to show your life, your mind, and the edges of your mind trying to find the truth and shape reality.
But it's one thing to say, okay, the guy rejected me, I went to the bathroom, I threw up. There's another thing to kind of build sort of brick by brick why that's a truth, a capital T truth to you that other people will also resonate with. Because we've all had that experience when you explain it in a way that's, again, I'm going to use this capital T truth, when you explain it in a way that's a deeper truth to you. And so I'm wondering about
if the person decides, if the person wants to write a memoir and decides, I'm going to put that the guy I really have a crush on, rapes me in the parking lot, then he or she is avoiding finding the deep truth that at that point the person was so real to you in your mind and in your imagination, and you have to show the amount of time you spend watching this person and sitting in his driveway watching him dribble a basketball, and standing on the sidelines of his football practice and passing him notes that he never responds to and writing his name over and over on your note. You have to describe what you were doing to make that a big deal to you.
And I think that's the carnality that you were referring to earlier. It's not necessarily all the physical senses that are happening at that moment, but your physical senses that are happening at that moment.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't describe how other people... And that's another thing I recommend is not to try to suggest what other people felt or what their motives were. I mean, if somebody tells you they feel a certain way, it seems like you can say that. But I never say, my parents were alcoholics or my mother tried to kill me because. I can say she told me she tried to kill me for this reason one day and for that reason another day and for that reason on a third day. So we don't really know. But it's not for me to deduce and make a confession for her. It's for me to occupy my experience and say how I felt. And no one, the thing that's sort of infuriating to me about the memoir haters is that most of them are refuting something I never said. They spend a lot of time saying, oh, this is obviously very dicey and no one could remember this. I don't know. I think the stuff that... There are things that happen to us that we chew on and gnaw on and talk about ad nauseum and ponder and talk to friends and family and shrinks. And I think those moments are often very vivid to us. And to suggest that it's impossible to know your own mind. There's something... I realize that we live in an age of subjective truth, and certainly I wouldn't suggest that my memory is infallible. But no one can tell me what the shape of my mind is like better than me.
Well, and I think, first off, you mentioned earlier that in some cases the memoir form might be, is good just for, heck, I might want my great-grandchildren to know about me.
Exactly,
so
right?
I write a memoir. But then there becomes the craftsmanship, because you want your great-grandchildren to enjoy reading the story of you. And I think part of the craftsmanship and part of what you're saying with the carnality is that this is your truth and your problems too. It's almost like a form of therapy. You can't say my mom was evil, so she tried to kill me. It's like, this is my experience of being a child with a mom like this.
Right. And I have to say about myself, and anyone who knows me or anybody I've sent pages to who has read the pages, I have a very physical, carnal memory. My memory is, I remember that way. I remember what people wear all the time. I remember stuff I ate. That's just my nature. That's just how my mind works. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for a memoirist, I think in my case it hasn't been a bad thing. But that's just how I remember stuff.
And again, I'll refer to Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which I view as a memoir just as much as fiction. He has almost none of what you would call, or at least what you would call as typical carnality. Like, he has people... Of
course not, but it's a great book.
Yes.
And he found a way to put his mind down, I think, in that book, right? Show his psyche, show his manner of perception and thinking. That's incredibly, riveting, right?
Right, and he even admits in the first, intro, this is a memoir. And then immediately he has an 18-year-old kid time traveling. So
right.
So teach me, how did he sort of navigate the truth there to come up with this deeper truth?
Oh, I don't know. You would have to. I'm not a fiction writer. I have no idea. But I have no idea how a fiction writer does it. I've never written fiction. I've never had much talent for it. I have no idea. I just know that if you're writing about yourself, and I just know this from working with students over 30 years and editing a couple of memoirs and, editing a lot of my students' nonfiction, is that if you're trying to represent yourself in a way that you're not, the reader's going to know.
Right. So, for instance, you describe
so if
in your
I tried
fiction.
to write like Vonnegut, I would suck.
Well, even when you tried to write fiction like you
exactly.
immediately felt it wasn't truth.
Right. I suck. Yeah.
So let's take another example, because you're a little hard, maybe appropriately or inappropriately. I'll ask you. You're a little bit hard on James Frey with A Million Little Pieces. And at the same time, you talk about Michael Herr's Dispatches, which is kind of, his memoir of Vietnam, where he also exaggerates and mashes characters together. What's the difference between the two?
Because all of James Frey's lies were intended to make the reader think of himself in a certain way. You never lost sight of he was shitty ass. You never lost sight of him roostering around.
And yet,
no, just a minute.
Sure.
The other thing is James Frey went on national television and spoke for the entire genre for years. For years. The standard he had embraced, which to me was everybody I knew who had ever written a memoir, including Michael Herr, Tobias Wolff, Maxine Hahn Kingston, Richard Wright, whom I never met. But everybody I ever met, Catherine Harrison, people who are Maya Angelou, all of John Edgar Wyman, all those people I ever met who ever wrote memoirs, didn't approach it the way James Frey did. And to me, they're all better writers, whether Oprah picked them or not. That's her mistake.
Okay.
But, the guy makes up this, takes the lowest, anybody can do anything they want, but there's no, if he had, he stood on national television. I felt myself sinking. I had people show up at my house with TV cameras the next day and say, "Oh, of course this is a lie." I sat on the New Yorker stage with the fiction editor saying, "Oh, well, the book's called The Liars Club. Of course you're lying." He spoke for my genre I've been working in. So I don't think I was as hard on him as he deserved. He was crying all the way to the bank, wasn't it?
Well, but it's interesting.
The guy's not really known as a moral titan. He's not really known as somebody that interested in the truth, and that is the opposite of every memoirist I ever wrote.
Well, you even talked about
I ever met or talked about. Believe me, he's made plenty of money, and he's Godspeed. But I didn't go. I don't think I was hard on him at all, or any of those people who just flat-footed. He didn't accidentally make those mistakes. None of those mistakes were accident. He didn't believe he was in jail. He didn't misremember that he was in jail. He decided to make up a lie. So nobody I know does that.
So
nobody I know does that.
Would you say his work works as fiction, and that he never should have called it memoir?
I never liked the writing. I thought it was pretty puerile, frankly. I just on a scale of 1 to 10, there are parts of it that I think if you're interested in people getting sober, but you never lost sight of him trying to impress you with what a little badass he was, and he seemed like just one of those guys at the end of the bar.
Well, okay.
Say, they were here the other night, and I beat them up, and we had a fight in the parking lot. I just really tiring.
You address this though in kind of like the skills of a good memoirist, in that they'll kind of be upfront with their relationship with the truth, and that some things might not be true. And in which case, for instance, Michael Herr's Dispatches.
Well, actually, the best parts of Michael Herr's Dispatches, as he told me in an interview that I had with him this year, are true. The dialogue, the stuff he wrote down, he said none of that is made up. But he created his psyche in a war zone. Who knows that better than Michael Herr? You can't say that his mind doesn't work that way. And I've known Michael Herr now for 20 years. Anybody who knows him knows he's not a guy nervously organized to be in a war zone. You know, and the book reflects that.
You know,
and I also never thought he was trying to show himself to good effect. I think he was very, very hard on himself, and it really showed the moral conundrum of being in a war zone.
You know what
and
I like?
think Fry just showed Fry. So
you know what I like about your description of Michael's book or of Dispatches is that, you know, even he refers to yet another book about Vietnam as Vietnam porn. So he's trying to kind of trying to find his own personal experience around the fact that like he didn't start off with a scene like, and then I shot 6 people. Like he kind of took a much more subtle personal scene to start off the book, which frankly might have been less boring for people. I mean, more boring for people who are looking for Vietnam porn.
Yeah, right.
And so it reminds me of your description of George Orwell's memoir. Like you have a passage of George Orwell's memoir where he's right in the middle of, you know, fighting against the fascists, and he meets a guy, and he doesn't discuss what's going on in the war. He doesn't discuss the potential political differences. He simply says, "I hope he liked me as well as I liked him," which is a very personal and honest moment. And
yeah, it felt like I sincerely doubt he manufactured that.
Right, and you say what makes Orwell a genius is trusting that this small, strange moment that touched him so deeply could also touch a reader if he told it frankly enough. Because we might go to a party tonight, for instance, and think the exact same thing. I hope he liked me as well as I liked him. Right.
It's a true human moment. You know, it feels like a true thing, and it's also in no way makes George Orwell look like he's not writing to polish up some version of himself to sell or to dupe the reader with. You can just tell. I mean, we all read novels like that. We all read. I used to work in the prisons, and I worked in a couple of prisons doing creative writing workshops, and there was a kind of, you know, and then I stepped out of my car and I had a bitch on each arm and I was strapped with this weapon and my dick was tied to my knee and you know, and then these same guys would write these incredibly moving things about looking for their dads, you know, when they were little kids, you know, and in some ways the more dangerous writing were these small, simple moments of just going to a mall where his dad's supposed to have a job and trying to find it, you know, and in some ways that was the more dangerous writing they did.
So this is related to not only kind of the structure of your memoirs, but also what you discuss in The Art of the Memoir, which is that I think the storyteller in general has to transcend time. So every story, of course, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but you often, it's very challenging to not necessarily write in that order. You want to write where intensity belongs. And you do that very well. And I'm just, you know, wondering if one starts not with the beginning, but with these vulnerable moments, because that's what the reader is going to resonate and draw the reader in.
I think it's whatever you can stand.
So,
you know,
what do you mean?
I just think it's so much about your psychological process that some people, you know, I throw away so much of what I write that I think everybody writes. I don't think with memoirs it's mostly a beginning, middle, and an end. I think there are mostly sort of episodes that you then organize. Mine tend to get organized in linear time so that it feels like there's a beginning, middle, and end, but they're mostly you just write these scenes and then you start to have, oh my God, I see that this whole period of my life was about, you know, shaping a self,
you know,
say, or distinguishing myself from my mother, say, or whatever.
You know, I'm wondering also about the memoir as literary form. So you talk a lot about, of course, George Orwell, Nabokov, Tobias Wolff, and all these just great, amazing writers. But there's also been memoirs out there where, let's just take as an example, a very commercial, successful example, Michael Lewis's Liar's Poker is clearly a memoir, and a lot of people enjoyed it.
The poker book, yeah.
Yeah, and so do you consider that as somehow different from the memoir form, even though it's,
No, I think there's, there are memoirs that are high literary art that you'll reread and reread and reread. I mean, I'm rereading a book right now called The Worst Journey in the World about Antarctica that is not a great piece of literature, but something about the story of these guys doing this polar exploration I just find very moving. So nobody would read that book. It's well written, but nobody would think of it on a par with Nabokov's Speak Memory or Nabokov's Speak Memory. So,
but I wonder if what's your stance? So you have a quote from Frank Chin, who is a great writer also, and he writes, being marginalized by the reading public was adjudged authentic, whereas being read by the mainstream invariably means you've sold out. And I wonder how much you...
Actually, the quote is from Amy Tan.
Okay. Well, and Amy Tan, of course, is extremely commercially successful.
Right.
And so I wonder how much you value something, whether it's based on its commercial success.
Oh, you mean if it's commercially successful that I wouldn't like it?
Right. Or that would give you some bias against it.
Oh, God, no. I'm not like that. I'm not like that at all. I mean, I'm somebody who put Stephen King on the great novelist of the 20th century list, for the modern library.
Well, that's a great example too, though. Like so I think a great memoir is On Writing by Stephen King, and you don't really, I don't know what your opinion is on that book.
I loved it, but I mean, all he does is praise me on the first paragraph. So I mean,
so
I have other reasons to love it. But no, I think Stephen King is a great writer. It doesn't matter his level of commercial success, So yeah, I'm not that big a snob. I hope.
Not that I'm accusing you of it. I was just wondering because it was mentioned in the book. So you give 3 good pieces of advice to all writers, and I think again, anybody who wants to be read by either future generations or their peers or whatever could benefit from this advice. One is you say writing is painful, and so what do you mean by that?
Nobody I know who's really good at it says anything else. I've never met anybody who didn't say that. Like
when you sit down to write now, and I don't know how often you do it, but do you ever get scared? I'm
never not scared.
You're never not scared. Okay, I like that because again, I think it's particularly hard for the memoirist because there's only so many. But even writing poetry or an article, I'm scared. Okay, and what are you scared of?
Sounding like an idiot, being boring, losing what little stature I've been able to, secure for myself.
And how do you,
same kinds of things any ego is scared of, some loss of power or something. I mean, it's venal and horrible to say it, but it's true.
So, and this is true for writing, for music, for movies, for comedy. But let's say you write something and you publish it, and then later you realize either it didn't get the acclaim you would have liked it to get, or you realize that it wasn't as good as you would have liked. How do you rebuild your self-esteem?
Well, I mean, I don't ever have much self-esteem.
All right, that solves it.
I mean, you wouldn't know that, but I don't think of my books as any great, shakes. They're not as good as Orwell or Han Kingston or Richard Wright or Nabokov. I mean, they're just not.
Okay, you just picked the 5 greatest writers of all time. So I just want to say for the listeners that Mary Karr's books are great and among the best and worth reading. But I'm going to move on to number 2 of your suggestions for writers, which is good work comes only through revision. And you wrote that you threw out over 1,200 pages of your first memoir.
No, of my second memoir. Sorry, my third memoir.
Third, okay, I'm keeping track. So
I probably threw out 400 pages of my first and 600 pages of my second. So,
and then I think you quoted, I forget if you quoted Orwell or someone else, that every page you write, you should 30% you should throw out.
Oh, that's my idea. But,
okay.
But I might have read it. I might easily have read it elsewhere.
And then the third thing you say for a good writer, which I think is very good advice, is that you have to have good reading habits. So
yes.
Do you read things that do you feel are in your voice, the voice that you aspire to be, or do you try to read things that are completely opposite of your voice?
Oh, I don't have any conscious thought of that. I'm a very promiscuous reader. I read, Southern writing, British writing, African writing. I just read a lot of different kinds of stuff. I'm not very, I don't consciously seek to read, this person will sound like me, and most people don't sound like me, so they're not much help to me. But no, I just try to read people who write better than I do. But I also read, I'll read anything, sort of. I get stuck at an airport, I'll buy a damn book rather than, not have one.
Well, so if sometimes when people ask me this question, I don't always remember off the top of my head the answer, but what are a few books you've read recently that have just blown you away?
I was very knocked out by Dana Spiotta's Innocence and Others, George Saunders' 10th of December, Terence Hayes's How to Be Drawn. It's a book of poetry. The book I'm reading now is a book that was written, I think, in 12, something like that, the early 1900s, early part of the 20th century. It's this book about polar exploration, but I'm also about to teach dispatches, among other things. So I reread a lot of stuff.
So I kind of want to close with one of the quotes that you closed with, and I think again this is related to the fact that like you were talking about G.H. Harding, who I didn't even know him as a mathematician, and until I read about him in your book, and I'm gonna have to I'm gonna try his memoir now on your recommendation. But you say, and I think this is really important for everybody to realize, we all sort of have some truth inside of us that could be shared, even if it's just to pass down our history to generations. But you
exactly.
say, and you say, none of us can ever know the value of our lives, of how separate and silent scribbling may add to the amenity of the world, if only by how radically it changes us one by one. And I thought that was very beautiful.
Right. Oh, well, thank you. I certainly think that, and I think all of us who try to write are trying to make the world less lonely in some way.
I like that trying to make the world less lonely, because ultimately, you see so much writing on the internet now because it's so easily accessible to both publish and to read. But a lot of it is kind of this writing from a pedestal, like here's X, Y, and Z of what you should do, or here's what's happening in the world right now. No one really I shouldn't say no one. Many people don't really connect loneliness to loneliness, which is what we can all relate to.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Isn't everybody else feel that way? Isn't it? It's not just. Tell me, it's not just me.
Right. And it is the human condition. We're stuck here in this body. So,
right.
Well, Mary, thanks so much. It's The Art of the Memoir.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for thinking of me. I appreciate it.
Oh, I really enjoyed your book, and I think it's a really great guide to writing in general. But I think also we're living in the world of the memoir right now, and I think the art of the memoir is a valuable book to read to learn how to do it. So.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. I will.
All right,
talk to you
my
again
dear.
sometime.
Take care.
Bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
I created this idea called Generation W. It's all about educating, inspiring, connecting women. And it's about building community at the same time. It's not like women are on some outpost somewhere, right? Just like ethnic people are on some outpost there, people of color, right? We're all together. So if we learn how to appreciate each other, we elevate one, we elevate us all. And so for the first year, that's where we started. And we had 700 people show up. They had no idea what they were showing up to, but they loved it. And they said, we want more.